Odessa
Mhm.
experiment was not only about raising the money, but the spirit of contribution of everybody. The experiment was to say, how do you make cinema where there is an involvement which is not based on money? Suddenly, this man, small man, big voice, speaking very good English, comes to me and says, "Who are you?" Oh God. And you know how scary it is. It was really, he dragged me like mad. If I remember one thing about Amma Ariyan is what the rushes looked like when we first saw without a cut, how beautiful it was. I mean, it was just mind blowing. First cut came and it was totally destroyed. I mean, I remember just sitting there looking at it and saying, what have I done? What have I done? Have I just killed that film from that beautiful rush? Have I brought it here? I cut the shot. I said, look, there's no need for this shot to be so long. We'll take the other end. We'll go back, and then we'll go the other one. And John just shouted at me, no, 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 you have to keep this whole shot. I don't know how to explain how you learn. You know, there is a kind of, and then you see the whole shot on the screen and you understand, yeah, that is the shot. That is the beauty of that shot, you know.
Hello everyone, welcome to Filmcopath. Today in our video podcast, we have with us Bina Paul ji. Binaji is a renowned film editor who has done exquisite and memorable work in Indian cinema, primarily in Malayalam language cinema. She is the recipient of 2 national awards and 3 Kerala State Film Awards. She has held several positions, including the artistic director of the International Film Festival of Kerala and the vice chairperson of the Kerala State Chalchitra Academy. She is also one of the members of the WCC, Women in Collective Cinema, an association of women in Malayalam film industry. Madam, thank you for joining us today. It's our pleasure to have you with us. Today, we discuss with her Amma Ariyan, which roughly translates to Report to Mother, a 1986 Malayalam film directed by the legendary avant-garde filmmaker John Abraham and edited by Binaji. The story revolves around the incidents following the death of a young Naxalite, upon whose death his friends travel to the village where his mother lives to inform her of the death of her son. Amma Ariyan is considered to be one of the biggest experiments in Indian cinema when funds were raised to make a film without giving slightest heed to its commercial viability. The film was the only South Indian film to feature in British Film Institute's top 10 Indian films list. Ma'am, once again, thank you for joining us today. It's our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And really, it feels like we are creating history, or we are becoming part of history when we are talking about Amma Ariyan, the kind of powerful picture, that movie that it was for Indian cinema. My first question to you before we start talking about the film is that we wanted to know from you about your interactions and experience of working with John Abraham. There are so many animated anecdotes around him in popular culture. If you could share some memories of the man, and if there's any interesting incident that you remember about him.
Well, it's difficult not to remember many incidents, but I must say that as you say, it was very animated. It was very lovely. There was a base of love that was very extraordinary about him, which is also why that anybody you meet will always say that John was such a good friend. You know, he had this capacity to interact, and he had the most amazing sense of humor. But he was also very rough. He enjoyed, in a sense, I think, teasing people, torturing them a bit. You know, there was a kind of devil care attitude about him. So, in fact, my first encounter with him was very scary because I had just gone to the Film Institute. I was a very young person. I was only 16 or 17 at that time. No, I was 19, right? Very young. And I was totally new to this world of cinema. I had sort of wandered into the institute literally. And I grew up in Delhi, but my roots are in Kerala. My father was from Kerala. So when I went there, somehow this identity, which I had not really been conscious of in Delhi, was very heightened in the Film Institute interview and all that she's a girl from Kerala. And I kept thinking, oh God, am I a girl from Kerala? I don't know the language. I don't know anything. Anyway, this was the kind of identity that was attached to me. And because of that, we were a few of us who were so sort of tentative, and we were sitting in front of the cafe there's a kind of tea shop in the Film Institute. And suddenly this man, small man, big voice, speaking very good English, comes to me and says, "Who are you?" I said, "Oh God." And you know how scary it is. It was really, he dragged me like mad. I don't know why
Oh,
you're coming here. What do you want here? You think you know cinema? You come from Delhi, so you think you know. So that kind of, totally rough. And for a innocent 19-year-old, it was such a scary experience. But as he leaves, he turns to the chai kada man. I mean, he's of course high, and that's his sort of scene always. He just puts on also a lot of an act he used to put on. And he turns to the man at the tea shop, and he says, "This is my girl. You better take care of her for the next 3 years. She's a very special friend." And so in a sense, he sort of also covered up all that ragging and everything. He sort of reached out in a sense. So that was the kind of character he was, very rough, but also with great sense of love for people. Yeah. So I always say that was my first experience, and it sort of remained etched in my mind. And when I met him subsequently, there was always this little fear in the beginning, that my God, is he going to rag me? So that's my starting with John. Yeah.
ma'am, I mean, we wanted to understand. So, will it be correct in thinking that John was kind of the pioneer in this alternate voice in Malayalam cinema? Like, Vidyarthi Kale Ithili Ithili even came before Adur Swayamvaram, right?
That's
And
right.
then came KG George, Padmarajan, even Aravind, and they all followed. So isn't he, he kind of started it, is it?
Well, actually, you cannot. There is no start. You see, the interesting thing was they were a community.
Mhm.
Arvindan, John, all of these were very good friends,
Okay.
and I think they all Adur. They were all at that point very good friends, and I think they all sort of supported each other in this. So there wasn't.
Mhm.
It wasn't a kind of first was me and first was you kind of
Okay,
thing. I
okay.
think. Historically, maybe if you look at chronology, maybe Vidyarthigal Idle Idle is the first one. But I would say there was together an atmosphere and a kind of collaboration between all of these people, which I would say marked the beginning of that period of Malayalam
Right.
cinema. It's not how he started. I think, in fact, there are stories about how one got a film and then they said, "No, I can't do it, you do it." There was this whole kind of collaborative spirit in that beginning, all coming out of the Film Society movement, in a sense. Film
Mhm.
Institute, Film Society, so there was, chronologically, maybe it's correct, but I would sort of emphasize the kind of atmosphere that made it possible for all of them to almost be working together.
Right, right, right.
Binaji, this in Amma Ariyan, it was made by the Odessa Collective that resisted against the mainstream Malayalam industry. In
Yeah,
fact, the film starts talking about Odessa Collective and how this film represents pure art.
that's right. There's a voiceover. Yeah.
Yes, if you could tell us some details about this resistance and its origins as you remember.
Okay. I would say there are two things again about this. One is about what mainstream cinema was at that time. It was one of the lowest points of Malayalam cinema at that point. It was, really. And I think people like John at that point were really wondering, uh, how do you make a film that actually is the voice of people? How do you actually, engage with this form um, in a kind of more true fashion, let's say? So it's not only about money. That is something I would like to emphasize, that the Odessa
Mhm.
experiment was not only about raising the money, but the spirit of contribution of everybody. Of course, John was at the helm. Of course, he wrote the script. Of course, he was the kind of man that drove it. But I think the experiment was to say, how do you make cinema where there is an involvement which is not based on money, basically, right? So that was the first thing. The other thing about Odessa is that uh, we're looking at a time post-emergency, etc., where there was a lot of disillusionment politically. There was a huge, I mean, after the idealism of the Naxalite movement, etc., there was a huge disillusionment among a lot of very young people because in Kerala, there was an attraction to the movement, which was, almost romantic and idyllic and so on and so forth. You're changing the world, revolution, all these notions.
Similar to Bengal as well, I think, quite similar to.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think there was this whole sort of community of people. And I think John was able to rally all these forces together in a positive manner. So the disillusionment, which is really the story of the film, was in the way of making the film a positive addressing of that issue. So Odessa is about trying to make cinema that is not alternatively funded, or not only alternatively funded, but also alternatively made. That you make a film with the people who are. So the way the film was shot, the way it was financed, the way it was shown, the way it was constructed in a sense, all this is part of the politics of saying that, look, we're not looking at models that exist, basically.
You put that very interestingly, ma'am, about the disillusionment, because when I watched the film, we see this guy, Purushan, and he's going to Delhi. And then, with the voiceovers and the way he is talking to his mother, it seems that he's not sure about going to Delhi. He's kind of, why am I leaving this place which I belong to? And then he sees this dead body, which kind of gives him a reason to stay back. It's kind of, he was not sure of going, and he was finding for a reason, and some way he gets a reason to stay back. And then slowly that personal problem becomes a political thing. So very, very interestingly, personal changes to political. So just wanted to understand, and the disillusionment kind of comes back as well. I remember there is this shot in one of the terrace where he says, this is the way spirits are crushed and all of that. So is it like, his disillusionment with the radical left or in his politics is also coming out through this film?
You mean John's or you mean Purushan's?
John.
John.
I mean, I kind of get overlap also, John and Purushan when I watched and when I have read about John.
Well, I would, from knowing, how we worked on the film, I would say that John was actually, of course, I think everybody was at that point. There was a lot of disillusionment, etc. But I did not see this overlap. I think he was telling a story. I really think that John, as I said earlier, he took the idea from the experiences of these people who wanted to tell this story. So it's not really his story. It is very much a story of the people who are in the film. This is what is really interesting. Everyone in that film, it is in a sense their story. So, of course, John as the director and so on, and I think as a political person, there may have been some disillusionments, etc. But John was, I think, reflecting more through this film what he thought needed to be said from these people who was the Odessa Collective. And this was certainly, I mean, everyone from Joy to Hari to, all the people you meet on the way, They were all people who had been through this disillusion. And I think that is the story he wanted to tell, to in fact heal them rather than find
Right.
for himself. Certainly, he had
Right.
his politics and all that, but I think also somewhere as an artist, and this is interesting, I think somewhere artists are able to go beyond just disillusionment, if you know what I mean. There wasn't,
Hmm.
he, he ought to be too attached to his politics, let's say. But
Right.
I think he was sympathetic and understanding of what was happening to a generation. I think that was the most important thing, because I've never, I mean, of course, he talk a lot about art and this and that, but I've never heard him sort of the kind of despair that we saw or see or we hear about from these people. Also, we traveled and all that, that
Hmm.
kind of despair was not there. Certainly not.
Right. Right. Right.
Not to say he didn't have politics, but I'm just saying that I think he found this. I think he thought Odessa had to reflect this disillusionment that was there in the youth, rather than his own, maybe.
Right.
Ma'am, I'm transgressing a little bit, but I want to know
Yeah.
really that you talked about Odessa Collective and you talked about telling people's story. It's kind of a people's movement, and we have seen these movements in say we talk about Mrinal Shane in Bengal, Ritik Ghotok in Bengal, and we have had these movements when people's stories are told and they are shown in the films and in the theaters. But constantly, what we see is that there is a problem with sustaining these movements in the long term, like what's happened in Bengal and also at other places. And so, don't we think that like when we are making a cinema, we're talking people's stories. How do we ensure that it is sustainable as well? How do we ensure that that cinema also makes certain profit so that we can make more cinema of the people? Don't you think like that is an issue with these movements which we do?
Well, I would say with the Odessa, it was not about profit. It was not the lack of profitability that actually killed the movement in a sense, because they did very well. I mean, Amma Ariyan was shown all over the place. They never had a formal release. But I mean, there's nobody who's not seen the film. I mean, I'm talking pre YouTube, where of course now
Hmm.
it's available on YouTube, but
Right.
even pre YouTube, it had been widely. And also the economics, the paradigm of the economics was different, if you know what I mean. It wasn't about who put in so much and therefore did they get it
Hmm.
back, etc. So that paradigm was different. But I think the sustainability uh, issue is really strong, and I think it did not sustain because of the lack of an economic model, but I think it did not sustain because, for one, John died,
Hmm.
and he was too central to this. I mean,
Hmm.
as a kind of very, very talented filmmaker, he was too central to this. So there was really no one who could. I think they tried, but there was nobody who could take on. And also the power of the personality to bring everybody together in a sense. He was such a chaotic, such a crazy character, but he had this power. So I think that was the problem. And let's not forget, then it comes into the 80s. And suddenly India is changing. Where, I mean, this became the mantra: profit, globalization. So I think there wasn't a way this could have survived because of
Hmm.
this whole change that also happened in the country. It's so many historical factors that actually did not help it. But I don't think it was economics. I really think it was, the lack of perhaps someone who could take on that role of leading. You do need, I mean, as much as we think of, leadership as a horizontal thing, there was a vertical that did exist, where John was, in a sense. So, unfortunately, because I really do believe that if he had been around, and even if another filmmaker had made a film through the Odessa moment, maybe there was hope. But then the 80s are there, and you're suddenly hit by a whole new economic system. You're looking at youngsters who are looking at life differently. You're also seeing an erasure of a lot of memory. Even, I mean, in the 80s, you never spoke about the emergency, you know. So there was this whole kind of erasure of, I mean, leave the Naxalite movement was never spoken about, but even the emergency, which had just finished 3 years before, was just not spoken about. I mean, the emergency has re-emerged very lately in discourse, you know. But otherwise, so I think there was this erasure. There was a lot of change that happened too fast for this kind of almost idealism to succeed.
Right.
Right.
And there's the cynicism of economics which crept in, if you know what I mean. It was
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
you know, I just think of the Asian Games. I mean, so many things happened. Color television comes, cable TV comes. You know, there's a whole environment of change, which for a organization that did not have this sort of towering talent to pull it through, did not. I mean, even for example, if we think of somebody like Adur's, even that could not, you know, the cooperative was not working. Nothing was working at that time. You know, it was too changed.
Right. Ma'am, if we talk about Amma Ariyan, we have to talk about this journey. And it's so interesting that it kind of, in the way it covers the whole of Kerala, from Wayanad to Kochi. And it's also the historical, journey where we talk about the milestones like the Naxalite movements and others. And the editing goes in sync. It's a very interesting editing, the cuts, the way they happen, and then there are the still images. So when we were collaborating with John, so was there any particular way he wanted the editing to be, or any advice that he had for you to kind of have in sync with that journey?
Well, two things. I have to tell you that one is that a year before the actual shooting, Venu and myself and John had spent a few weeks together and had actually the first part, about 20 minutes of the film had been written.
Okay.
Which is him leaving the house, all that, right? So that is a very structured part of the film. After that, I think John decided, let's do the journey. We'll find on the way all this that happens. In fact, I went to Wayanad. I was at the shoot in Wayanad. I didn't do the Cochin part and all that, but in Wayanad, I was there. And I remember after the sequence where the dead body is found, we were just driving around the road, and suddenly he sees this hill, and he sees this tree, and he says, come on, let's get off. He pushes Joy onto top of the hill. And that's the death alone, that whole sequence we create later. So the thing is that a lot of the film was constructed. There was an improvisation. We go to Calicut, the strike is on. The first the medical students are on strike. We go to Thrissur, the students are rehearsing a play on Mandela. So it's there's a kind of almost documentary strain that happened in Amma Ariyan. So it wasn't, so I was very young. This was one of the first films I was doing. So he was really, what was it? He was sort of guiding me all the time. He wasn't he wasn't an overbearing person, idhar cut karo, wahan cut karo, nothing, but very much into what the flow of things were. Are we getting, are we getting to the heart of things? And I have this famous story where, I don't know, you all must have heard it many times. I've said it so many times, about the sequence with the International, where there's that long shot where the camera goes back, the handheld camera goes back. So
Yes,
that
yes.
shot, for some reason, we cut it without music. Those days we were cutting without music. So I cut the shot. I said, look, there's no need for this shot to be so long. We'll take the other end. We'll go back, and then we'll go the other end. And John just shouted at me, no, 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 you have to keep this whole shot. So, so it was like, I don't know how to explain how you learn. There is a kind of, and then you see the whole shot on the screen and you understand, yeah, that is the shot. That is the beauty of that shot. It's not the cut, it's the holding that is more important. So that kind of thing, a lot happened. He gave you a lot of space to do, because frankly, by the time we reached the editing, he was totally chaotic. But somewhere there was a antenna that was there and he kept an eye, but it was a bit of a chaotic edit, I must say. There was a lot of, because I used to get really annoyed, and he used to be totally but yeah, so I think he, as a film maker, he understood what tools I brought, and he did not sort of interfere in that, but he knew what he wanted, if you know what I mean. So there was this kind of very nice synergy where we would sort of fight or argue, but I mean, for me, it was just the most wonderful learning experience. Yeah. Because also, I must tell you that it's very strange, because those days, there were no all this business of machines where you go back and forth, etc. So we had to do a cut on the moviola. We did the cut, and then you project it on the screen, and you see the full edit, and then you come back and make the corrections. You couldn't do it then and there. All the time you were seeing it on the small screen. So first we see the rushes, and I cannot tell you, everybody was blown by the rushes. It was the most, I think, if I remember one thing about Amma Ariyan, is what the rushes looked like when we first saw without a cut, how beautiful it was. I mean, it was just mind-blowing. First cut came and it was totally destroyed. I mean, I remember just sitting there looking at it and saying, what have I done? What have I done? Have I just killed that film from that beautiful rush? Have I brought it here? But then you go back, and you work and you understand, etc. So, I mean, that process was really actually fantastic, because that feeling of having destroyed that rush has always stayed with me. And I remember John saying, forget it, yeah, this is nothing. It's fine, it'll be fine, and all that. So, yeah, so I think we had some disagreements. The whole Devi angle, that line for me was very dicey. I think in the edit it shows that suddenly this Devi, this girl, that Padma becomes, the Devi, the mother, this, that. So there were some sort of conceptual problems, which I thought were not resolved through the edit. But yeah, on the whole, it was.
So we talked about this Devi, and there's this recurring mother figures which we have across Amma Ariyan, and we want to talk about that. If you remember John discussing his ideas about bringing these mother figures across the film.
Well, it's really interesting that emerged at the edit, actually. Because, I mean, they shot a lot, and like, I don't know whether he consciously, but it did arrive at the edit a lot, that you end each scene on the mother watching or the mother waiting. If you see, all the sequences are mostly constructed like that, the mother is waiting. So yeah, that was a kind of thing that emerged at the edit, consciously, of course. Lots of things. I mean, see, in this process of filmmaking, who claims the ideas is not at all important. It's how these ideas actually, because, for example, there is the shot over the Bepur bridge where that doll is hanging, and for me, that was such a fantastic kind of, now that doll was hanging in the car, it was there. The cinematographer has taken the shot like that. But the emphasis has come through the edit, where you draw attention to that. So
Yes.
it's not, it's how this everybody puts in what they think, and therefore the film becomes, it's not, so I wouldn't say that the idea of the mothers or anything was exclusively anybody's, but it did emerge out of the edit. I mean, we were conscious as we went on editing, we became more and more conscious that we need to shape this or mold this into a kind of more solid theme than perhaps was there in the script or the articulation in the movie. Because that the thing that John had in his mind, which was sort of the image he had, was this mother watching a film on that beach, and everybody coming and telling him that your Hari is no more. That was the start of John's Amma Ariyan idea. That somebody you're watching a film, somebody comes and tells you that or this group of people come and say that you are no longer, and then she walks. So that was the original Amma Ariyan idea, I think. And then, of course, everything else emerged, and we talked about the beginning and him leaving, and then finding all these stories on the way, all that. Yeah.
I had a very interesting observation, ma'am. I don't know if I am thinking it correctly. He's like, this filmmaker, we have learned that he is a very chaotic person and all of that. We see his protagonist who is like, he has a particular political agenda, and he's kind of, he puts his politics ahead of maybe a lot of things. But we also see that when he's thinking about what his mother is doing, he's seeing his mother and his girlfriend together. It's kind of a domestic setting. He's also kind of maybe not dreaming but visualizing them in this way.
Hankering.
Yes.
Well, this was my problem with it, actually. This was my
Right.
problem. But I think at some level, I think, I hate to say this, but um, like lots of males, that that resolution wasn't there. I think this notion of the girlfriend, the mother, domesticity. I really think John had, in fact, if I have to be critical, I would say as a man, he hadn't dealt with that really. So maybe that's why, because I talked a lot to him about it. Of course, that time one was very young and one couldn't perhaps articulate it so well.
Of course.
But
Yes.
it is, in a sense, a kind of crisis of masculinity, kind of, because he wasn't a kind of aggressive. I mean, he was very aggressive, but he wasn't, let's say, he wasn't masculine in that sense. He wasn't a person who, but I think, maybe it's also the late 70s, early 80s. You're still, these things haven't yet crept in. So that is not a very well articulated, and I think it arises from his own confusion about this. I completely agree, and I was, we talked a lot about it, but there was no resolution in a sense, and that's why I said that is the part of the film that seems conceptually weak.
You're talking about the editing. Then there was this few newspaper clips and still images which come around during the middle of the film, like the clips and the images one by one. And was it on the editing table, on the sequencing frames, or was it like any specific?
It was on the editing table, and that was a bit of a chaos also, I must say. It was, I mean, I don't know how to explain. It became almost fillers in a way. There was something he needed to say, and I think there was some difference of opinion with some part of it. I'm not sure, but yeah, it was on the editing table. Yeah.
Another thing, ma'am, I mean, I don't know. It's again what we have read, because we belong to a later generation. We have heard that, the representation of women in John Abraham's film. They are more listeners, they are bystanders. They are not into the movement, everything that the film stands for. So do you think that way? Do you think that it needed more representation between Amma Ariyan or other three films?
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There is, even in this, while you're saying, the strength of the mother,
Hmm.
you're talking about disempowered women. You're notionally giving them by a strength by having to bear suffering of
Hmm.
their
Hmm.
children, the suffering of of the politics of the time, etc. So, yeah. So, I mean, completely, there's a problem over there, and that's exactly what I said. It was a problem. It was, I think. But knowing John, I think if he had made a film today, I mean, he was very, this kind of talk about feminism, etc. He would say that, I'm a feminist. I'm a feminist. But I don't think he defined it for himself. That was the sort of base of it, maybe. So I don't
Right.
know, maybe.
Right.
I mean, maybe today he would have been a very different person
Absolutely.
and a very different filmmaker.
Yeah,
Yes.
maybe he may have. But yeah, there's also a generation of men who don't learn. He may have been one of those.
That is true.
He would have been 75 or 78 now. So God
Hmm.
knows, he may have been a grumpy old man who thought women have to be in their place.
Ma'am, I want to ask you about the Women in Collective Cinema, which you are a member of now. And you were also one of the earliest members of the technical brigade in the Indian film industry. Don't think there were many women working behind the camera at that time when you started. So, if you could tell us about the position of women in the industry at that point in time and now what you see in these 5 decades of how it has changed and what has happened, what is yet to happen.
Very interesting. In Kerala, I don't see much change. You see,
Oh.
we founded the collective uh, because of this lacunae, that,
Hmm.
I mean, apart from law, apart from the fact that there are facility problems, etc., the the core issue is lack of voices,
Hmm.
diverse voices, whether it is a cinematographer, whether it is a editor, whether it is a makeup artist. Point is that the moment a place is deprived of this diversity, you have a dominant narrative that does dominate, right? Which is what is happening with Malayalam cinema completely. So that is why we formed the collective. I think nobody's understood. It was, of course, it was a historical moment. We had this horrible abduction case, all that. But I think it was part of finding our voices, because I had already been there 30 years. I'd already spoken a lot about these issues, etc. But this moment when we came together, I think what we are saying is that this lack of diversity in technical voices, in the storytelling voices, in the policy making voices, is affecting the stories that are being told. There is a problem. That is the root of the problem. You cannot expect a change. You cannot expect that the stories will change unless all this changes. And unfortunately, it hasn't changed. I mean, when I worked a few years ago, I mean, all those years ago in Kerala, I was the only one. We have a couple now. We have a few more women. I mean, I think Bombay and maybe Calcutta has changed quite a bit. We see in Tamil Nadu not so much. There is some change, but Kerala certainly very little change. In terms of this, I'm saying that, where you're saying that women have a voice to tell a story, do take a shot, edit a film, so there is a
Hmm.
kind of resistance still in the industry. And I think that is lack of training facilities, lack of I think a lot of lack of understanding of what the industry is. All that, I mean, it's like those days when you sang a song or you're a dancer, you're a tawaif or something. That notion still exists, unfortunately. So that is what we are hoping we can change through the fact that you encourage more women. Come here. Unless you're here, there is nothing that will change. So the attempt to say have sexual harassment committees, security, pay, all that is to say that, look, come, this is a nice, good, fantastic professional field that women should come into. So so the Women in Cinema Collective has been a very important thing that has happened. And I think for the first time, this question was addressed, not only in terms of just the practicalities or execution of film, but also content, narratives, all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
So it's not changed so much, but I think in other places it's changed, but then I have other problems. I mean, corporatization is another story. So
would you say with the arrival of WCC, there are like more opportunities for women to work in the technical fields in cinema? Would you think that has become a little bit easier than it was, say, a couple of years back?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that women feel a little more confident, and we were one of the people who forced the government of Kerala to give a grant to women to make films. So there are 2 big grants now given to 2 filmmakers. So that kind of thing we are hoping will create some change. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I think we are towards the end of it, Bina ma'am. I think it was so like 45 minutes went by and we didn't even realize it was
I hope I didn't talk too much.
No,
ma'am. We really enjoyed, and it is to be able to talk to you about John Abraham. I mean, what else would one desire on an evening like this? I mean, thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. It was really interesting. It was nice to sort of revisit all these things that one doesn't think of so often. Yeah.
And I also wanted to thank you, ma'am, for the way you were conducting IFFK. I have been there twice. We both wanted to go this December, but things got postponed.
Next
the grounded approach. Next month in March.
Hopefully.
Okay. But the grounded approach, I love it so much. Without any, a lot of hustle and bustle, great films being seen. I mean, it's so nice to be there.
Well, that was my complete feeling, that the film festival is not about red carpet, stars. It's about filmmakers, it's about actors, it's about technicians, it's about the people who watch these films. So I don't think anybody, beyond a point, who wants a red carpet? But this is also my personality, so it's also a different thing. Maybe that's the way to go sometimes. I don't know.
And what a surprise it was to see Godard on the oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how I swung it. I must have written so many letters. And
that was something that we pulled off.
But he really was something, huh?
Yeah. For so long. And he was showing this image book and everything. It was such a surreal experience.
It was really nice.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.